Off here. Cool. So we're all good. Awesome. So, Chris, welcome to the Fitness Burrito Podcast. I think this is episode 25, 26. People always tell me to write it down. I'm not going to lie. Don't write it down. So yeah, I'm pretty excited today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dan Quirion. I'm the guy behind the podcast. And today I've got another coach who I met through mutual friends, kind of when I first moved over to England, a guy called Chris Speed. And he's going to come on today and just talk a lot about, a bit more performance aspect stuff, which is something that I don't think we've covered a whole bunch on the podcast. We've talked about a whole bunch about nutrition and just kind of maybe fundamentals of training, a lot of like hypertrophy stuff. But I think today it'd be cool to have a guy like yourself come on, talk a bit more about maybe ollie lifts, strength training, which is what we're going to do. So Chris, if you want to just give a bit of an intro about yourself, can be as short or as long as you want, mate, that would be awesome.
Okay, cool. So I am Chris. I run a company called Ronin Strength. We are a online first coaching collective. We deal with mostly weightlifting and powerlifting stuff for people who are either just getting into it or who want to compete at a national level. We do also do stuff like sports performance. I think the other guys we have are kind of more like bobsleigh rugby players. My kind of entry into coaching was pretty typical for someone in England. I ended up playing rugby for quite a while. Started going to uni and doing sports science, then slowly kind of transferred over into coaching from there. And that's kind of led from, I think the first class I ever taught was a legs, bums and tums core class at a leisure centre. And nice. I've slowly transferred over into just doing weightlifting coaching to now. So I think that must have been seven years ago, started coaching at a random leisure centre. Then I've slowly just developed into this.
Do you ever think, kind of looking back, did you ever think you'd be running your own kind of online company with all the stuff that you're doing?
Yes, I think I knew that I was going to run my own thing, but not this early on. My plan was definitely, I'm going to play rugby for quite a while. Then when I start to get towards the end of my career, that's when I'm going to start transferring into it. Because that's what a lot of guys that I see have kind of done. I don't know, you've probably seen him. There's a guy called Ollie Marchon, runs a company called Marchon Athletic.
Yeah.
That's literally the path he took. He played rugby for St Albans. I think it was St Albans, and played quite a high level, was quite a good player. And then once he was done, he transferred over into coaching. Mine was a transfer very early because I started playing rugby, then played rugby league, then played sevens, started to become more social with it, and then just enjoyed coaching more and then started competing in weightlifting. And I don't think I even really realised when I just decided, nah, fuck this, I'm retiring from rugby and I'm just going to do weightlifting instead. Because I kind of went, I'll play next year, but I don't know what club I'll play for. And I just never went back. And it wasn't really a big decision. I just went, I'm just not going to do that anymore.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah. And is there a reason why you decided to go down the weightlifting path? Because I remember speaking to you back in the day, and I remember you said you'd had quite a few injuries, and I think it was your knees and stuff. Didn't you do your MCLs and things like that? Meniscus, maybe, I forget. Why did you just kind of decide to go into the weightlifting stuff rather than just maybe generic PT or whatever?
I think it's because from 14, as soon as I started doing gym stuff, it was always for something. So it was never, I'm going to go to train just to get fit or just to stay healthy. When I first started training, it was doing push-ups and pistol squats and trying to learn how to do different core stuff because some of my friends did free running and skateboarding. So it was to get strength for that. Then when I went to start playing rugby at school, I got told if you want to play for the age group above, for the first team at the senior school, you have to get stronger because you're not very tall. So I started doing that there. So when I went into rugby, into coaching afterwards, that's what I knew how to do. And I almost probably up until now didn't understand why someone would go to the gym just to go to the gym, as in that's the ends and the means. I didn't get that at all. And I do now, being able to go and train just because you have the privilege and the ability to train is really enjoyable. But back then didn't understand it. I didn't have that concept. So I didn't understand that concept. So that's why I went into weightlifting. And it was very much, I just had to bide my time because you'll know it's when you first start off, if you want to be a powerlifting coach, but you haven't really powerlifted yourself and you don't have any clients, you can't just go in and someone who really wants to be a national level powerlifter, they're not going to come to you straight away. So I did do the whole basically training people for general fitness thing, then slowly transferring over, building towards this.
Yeah, defo. And I mean, for anybody who hasn't, if you haven't heard of Chris before, just go check out his Insta. It'll be in the link in the bio, to be fair, for the episode. But yeah, you're doing shit that's just fucking outrageous, bro. I think the best one, and I've showed this video too, I don't even know how many PTs I work with. When you're doing like shins to, what do you call it? When you start on the floor on your shins and you basically just kind of power up with like 100 kilos on your back.
Oh, the knee jumps.
Yeah, like that. I don't know too many people that. I mean, I had some of the guys afterwards. I was like, let's go try to do a body weight. We went on the gym floor. So basically, anybody who doesn't know what a knee jump is you're basically just kind of like on the floor, basically sat on your shins, and you have to explode up onto your feet. And Chris does it with, what did you do, 110 kilo or something the other day?
The most I've done is 121, but that's
Yeah.
the point where like we started talking about at the gym. I think the guy who owns it, Damon, we were all like chatting like, how much do you think you could do? I was like, I think I could eventually like get to 140. And someone just said, what do you do if you miss it? And I was like, never thought about it.
Yeah. And you probably should.
Yeah. So we started looking at like physically, how do you miss it? And this guy, I can't remember what his actual name is, but I talk to him on Instagram sometimes. I think his name's like RJH.36, and he's like a stunt BMX rider and does Olympic lifting. And
Okay.
he missed one, and he just had to go on all fours, basically like a camel, like a cat cow, and just let the bar roll down his back. So I kind of looked at that. I was like,
nah.
so if I ever go down and like kneel down with a weight and go, I might not get it, I'll just go, no, I just won't do it.
Yeah. It's so funny because literally I had the boys, I went on the gym floor, and I know we're going on a tangent, but I had to mention it, but I got the boys on the gym floor after, and I was like, all right, try a body weight. And then two of the lads were like, okay, that's pretty hard. And then I was like, do it without your hands, like put your hands on your head. And I'm not even kidding. Like 3 of the boys almost ate shit, like almost face planted. Yeah. And I was like, now imagine putting a bit of weight on. So yeah, go check out what Chris's his weights are like, because they're pretty ridiculous. But I think a good point with what you said is you kind of ease your way into it, but you've also been doing it for the last, like 4 or 5 years consistently. So it's taken you quite a time to build up to it, but now you're at that elite level, and I'm pretty sure you're up there, aren't you? Like British rankings, are you?
Yeah. So what weight class was it? So we're competing like the 89s and 96s. I'll always be kind of like in the top 3. And then the goal for like all of the guys that I compete with and train with, like we all kind of like the main competition you'll look at is like Commonwealth. And that's what we're all like looking towards. So for me, I'm always kind of like within like the top 3 of whatever weight class that I compete in. So my next goal is to try and get first to try and go to Commonwealth in 2022. So in like 2 years, in like just under 2 years. That would be the goal for me.
That's awesome, man. Awesome. Well, I think it's fair to say we've got a pretty experienced coach to kind of chat about, strength and weightlifting on today. So I guess that kind of leads into the first question, Chris, which is, I guess, how would you start training somebody who's like interested in the weightlifting aspects of it? Like, what do you start doing with them? Do you do assessment with them? Do you go through mobility, basic stability work? Like, how would you break that down? I guess even from your online coaching perspective.
So with the online stuff's a little bit different, because at least the way that I coach very much suits online, because it's the way that I coach myself. So whenever I had I say I have a coach, I had one guy back in the day who used to help me out, and he's a guy called Lou DeMarco, and he's a very, very, very experienced, very old American coach. And he just put out online, oh, this is the Olympic lifting hybrid program I use with some American football players at my college. So I asked him, can I have that program? He said, yeah. And every month he might reply to me an email and say, oh yeah, do this or do that. So the way that I would coach someone is do a general movement screen, which is what we do for everyone on the running team anyway. So looking at kind of like, can you lunge? Can you Cossack squat? Can you do a curtsy squat? Can you do an overhead reach? So just testing all of your general major stuff. So what's your thoracic mobility like? Then after that, it's just going reverse chain. So the same way as if we get someone in for a PT session and they want to learn to back squat, you don't always put them in under a bar straight away. You might go and do a goblet squat. You might do a box squat first. It's the same thing with Olympic lifting. The hardest part, in my opinion, for Olympic lifting is literally, and it seems like the simplest bit, is taking the bar from the floor to just above your knee, with yourself being in a good posture to actually finish the lift. So you don't do that first. Where you would start is teaching someone how to do an overhead squat. And then after that, teaching them how to do a front squat. And then after that, it'd be literally just teaching them how to do an overhead press and a push press, because then those are the prerequisites to show, okay, so if you were to do a snatch, a clean, or a jerk, you know how to get yourself into position. And because those movements are slower, they have time to organize their joints and to think about it a little bit more, so they can actually teach themselves how to do the right movement pattern. After that, it would be just like a snatch balance or a drop snatch, depending on what you'd call it, but depending on who you were taught by. So then you're basically taking the bar from your back and dropping under it like you would in a snatch, but there's not the challenge of taking it from the front of you to behind you. And then you would learn how to do a muscle snatch from your hip then a power snatch from your hip, and then a full snatch from your hip. So basically you go from like the end position, really slowing it down by doing an overhead squat, and then you slowly take it further and further down towards the floor, increasing the challenge from there. And what I would encourage people to do as well is going through those positions. So going from an overhead squat to a snatch balance to a snatch from hip, snatch from just above the knee, a snatch from low hang. So going from top down to the floor. And if you can, always do a full snatch. This will probably need you to have a coach there to do it. But if you can, always do full snatches for like your first 6 months. And the reason I say that is because we get in a lot of CrossFitters who, because they got taught in a class, it was basically just do a snatch. And if they could only power snatch, they'd get told, oh yeah, right, that's fine. You can work it your way into doing full snatches, but power snatches are fine for now. And then you'll see them, they'll be able to full snatch up to like 40 or 50, 60 will get on the bar, they power snatch all of it. You can get rid of that problem of, not being able to get under it really easily just by when you start, just always do full snatches or always do full cleans and always do full jerks. But for me, it's just making it as simple as possible. Like there's one of the Chinese lifters, I can't remember what his name is. He was like a champion in the 69s. There's like a little quote of him in one of his interviews saying like the simplest things are sometimes the hardest to grasp, which is why with weightlifting you have to work on it so much. You need to make sure that you make it as simple as possible because it's already a hard thing to get to learn. So if you then make weightlifting more complicated when you're a beginner, it completely muddies what you're supposed to be trying to do. You need to try and make it as simple as possible. So if someone can just about do an overhead squat, you go, okay, cool, we'll do a snatch balance. And it doesn't need to be very complicated. You just need to make sure that they get that movement pattern down that feels good to them. Then when they can do a snatch balance, okay, now we'll go on to the next step. And you just keep trying to master each step until like it feels simple. And that's the key. So show something, make it simple so they know how to do it and they can do a bit of load with it and then just move along the steps. And that's like, I think if you wanted to see like what steps we use, they're not very different because they work. On California Strengths page, I think they still have Glenn Penley's old like Penley step 5s or Penley steps, and he just goes reverse chain. So do an overhead squat, do a snatch from hip, do a snatch from knee, do a snatch from floor. That's literally the same way we do it because that's the way that's most reliable. And you just go through those steps until you learn each of them, even whether it takes you a month or 3 months, and you just keep going through until you've learned all of it. And eventually you will be able to do a very nice snatch from the floor or clean from the floor or jerk or clean and jerk from the floor. And it's literally that simple. It's just the time it takes is going to vary from person to person.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think, from looking at some of the guys around my gym who probably do a bit more ollie kind of work and even just, seeing other stuff online, a lot of people don't reverse engineer it that way, do they? I think they'll do the opposite. They'll start from the floor and then they'll start trying to get you to lift, to your point, from like below the knee, when you said actually we do it the opposite way and we actually start from the top in an overhead squat, which makes sense. Do you think like, is that a common philosophy, do you find, across most coaches, or do you think everybody varies? Because I mean, somebody who's listening to this who wants to Olympic lift, who has no idea where to start, I think, what you've just said is probably pretty important for them, because they probably would have thought, well, I just need to put on some 5s on the end of each bar and just go for it. And then just like wing it basically, when realistically, you probably want to get a coach to at least guide you. And obviously Ronan's strength is a good place to start, but yeah, would you say that's a common philosophy you see, like even the guys massively, that you worked with?
Like massively. And I'd say, like you're saying, guys is the operative word. Like I used to kind of try and treat everyone very much, obviously, because you don't want to like discriminate or assume things about people. But one of the things I've noticed is a common trend. When you get most of our beginners who sign up for training programs, like where they're like, I'm a beginner, I don't know how to do anything, are girls. They want to make sure they do it right. So they'll be the people who they'll say that they can't do Olympic lifts properly, but actually they just need confidence given to them. The guys are always the ones who will try and snatch 40 or 50 off the floor on their first session when they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And sometimes it works out okay. Like you look and think, oh yeah, that just needs polishing up a bit. But really, if you do it from the top down, like I'm saying, each of those positions has something within it that's not going to let you compensate. Like if you're doing an overhead squat from the rack, you need to learn to push press it and how to overhead press it from behind the neck properly, which means that even something as small as it's going to help you work on your shoulder mobility because you're having to do this, an overhead squat, and slow the movement down and learn to brace is really important. If you do muscle snatches or snatches from hip, it doesn't let you basically skip the second pull, like that triple extension, because you can't, because now there's no momentum to be gained because you're not going from floor. That's another thing where now you've got to self-organize your joints so that you actually reach triple extension. And even if you feel like, oh, I can do a snatch from the floor, do it top down. Even if you spend the first 2 days of your training week doing it from the top down, then you do it from the floor at the end of the week. It's really, really important that you go from top down, just because that is, I say it's the best way. It's a better way than just going from the floor It's no coincidence that if you go and look at, like, let's say Ukraine, you go and look at Russia, you go look at China, you go look at America, you go look at any countries that all have different systems. They all do top down. Very few of them will say do a snatch from floor. They'll ask you, so like, oh, show us a snatch, and they'll show you a snatch, and then they'll give you the bar and be like, okay, show us what that looks like, and they'll see what it looks like to kind of like gauge how bodily aware you are. But they do top down. Like, I think there's a old story, I think in Ukraine, and I'm pretty sure in one of the former Soviet countries, they don't let you go from floor for like the first year if you're a beginner, like you're a kid, because they're like, okay, what's the point? You'll just mess it up. They do all block and all hang, because they can work you through the positions and slowly bring you down to the floor, so they know that you will be perfect.
That's cool. I mean, and to be fair, when you think about it, it makes sense for you not to encourage somebody to lift a shit ton of weight from the floor into an overhead position when they maybe never have been in that position before.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think, for maybe people out there that are listening who are wondering why Olympic lifting might be good for them. So obviously we know that, for the most part, you can compete in it, you can lift heavy weight, but for the guys out there who maybe don't do it, what would you say the benefits are, just from your perspective, from like a performance perspective? If you're a runner, if you're a sprinter, if you play rugby, if you play basketball, like what would the clean and jerk and the snatches carry over?
So I would say that I'm trying to think about how to explain it without making it too convoluted. So you'll know you have that thing called the force velocity curve. So where you have really like high speed on one end where you're not producing much force, maximal strength on the other end where you're producing maximum force, but really it's not being done very fast. So let's say like your absolute 1 rep max deadlift. So jumping, sprinting, footwork drills are on the speed side where you're producing lots and lots of speed, your velocity is high, but then actually your force isn't very high. Olympic lifts are one of those weird lifts that kind of hang out in the middle section, maybe slightly to the left. So it's power or like strength speed or speed strength. Being able to apply strength at varying speeds and in varying amounts is really important. And it just gives you one more tool that's going to allow you to get stronger and get faster and learn how to absorb and produce force. And as well, it's just it's very satisfying to learn. It's going to help you to get more mobile. So let's say instead of being like, oh, I've got to do loads of mobility work and overhead squats and kettlebell work, if you know that you're going to be able to work on your mobility and your power and your strength by doing some Olympic lifts that look cool, it's better. And as well, like for people like you, where you're coaching, like you're doing like more stuff for like basketball teams and like football teams and stuff, it's going to be more interesting if you show some guys how to do a power snatch and a power clean and let's say some box squats. If you now say, okay, boys, we've got 3 rep max today, they're going to be more excited than if you go like, okay, boys, right, we're going to do some like prehab and rehab, and we're going to do some like some dumbbell snatches. Like it just gets people going a bit more, and it adds variety. Like instead of just doing plyometrics and some trap bar deadlifts, or just like having some really good solid lifts, but not a high variance of like what you're actually doing. Having the variation in there through the Olympic lifts is in my opinion, is very important. Like whether you do the full lifts or whether you do variations, you kind of do derivatives, whatever it is, because it's adding in variety. And it's adding in more movements, like more in your toolbox. And that doesn't mean you even have to do the lift from ground or from hang to overhead. You could literally be doing pulls, but having those variations in there is like really, really invaluable. And for normal people who don't do sports performance, like as in they're not training to perform in a sport, they're just training because they really love training, they want to stay healthy. Like, I suppose it's similar to going across to like the CrossFit way of doing things. You're doing it because you want to be able to dip your toe into lots of different things. You want to be able to do a bit of everything. And I think that's fine. Like if the only reason you want to do Olympic lifts is because you just want to be able to see if you can do it. Like if you're not training for anything in particular, then I don't see anything wrong with that. I actually think that's a really good idea. If you want to do Olympic lifts just to see if you can do it, then for me, that's reason enough. But just to see that you can do it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I don't know if there's something going on with your video, Chris, but I can't see anymore. Just thought I'd let you know.
Oh, really? Hold on.
No, it's all right. But no, just while you're doing that, there we go. No, I think that's, like you said, a lot of really good things there. I think variety, just how it carries over into different sports. And again, you could dive into that for days. And I think one thing you mentioned about people doing CrossFit too, like in my gym, and I work in a commercial gym at Pure Gym. And, for anybody who doesn't live in the UK, it's just the biggest fitness chain in the country. But like, there's so many people now that are doing cleans, that are doing, snatching, and they're jerking. Like and there's people that you never would have thought about maybe seen in the gym doing that. And I think
Yeah.
it just comes back down to confidence, and it is kind of cool. Like, it is fun to watch. And it's funny how little things like Olympic lifting can really help people get more out of their training. So yeah, no, that's spot on. Thanks for kind of diving into that a little bit more. Cool. I guess, like, because we kind of talked about a few of the mistakes I guess people might make, but what do you find are like the big kind of 3 common mistakes? And I don't know if you're muted again, Chris, but it says you're muted on the screen. But yeah, what are like maybe the 2 or 3 big mistakes you'll see somebody make with the ollie lifting, which I guess one of them being that you should start from the top going down rather than from the bottom. So that's probably one, but.
So the other ones, the major ones would probably be trying to force it and just trying to go a little bit heavy too soon. So with Olympic lifts, like, you're trying to move the heaviest load you can as fast and as efficient as you can. So my opinion is that you do need to spend a lot of time working on your technique, but you need to do it within kind of basically like the 70 to 90% range. So you can't go and max out all the time if your technique is not stable. So if I go in, I've been doing it for long enough where I have technical errors, but my technical errors are very much weaknesses. So my butt shoots up off the floor on a snatch when it gets heavy because my hip strength compared to my leg strength is crap. So as in, like, my back squat is ahead of my deadlift, for example, which I'm trying to fix. So if my body has the choice, it's going to swing it into my lower back and then back into my legs, rather than staying in that upright position like you would want to be, where your hips are lower than your chest. So for me, if I max out and go heavier every day, I know that if I get to that point where my butt starts to shoot, it's like, well, that's because that's too heavy for today. That's as heavy as you're going to go. Some people will go so heavy that they can't do the lift properly. When you're in like your first couple of years, the main thing I would try and do is basically have the standard, like a really high standard in place for yourself, where you're trying to make sure that your technique gets a bit better every session, and you've got a really high standard for your movement in place, but your expectation of what weight you're going to do it with is literally 0. So you come in and you think, especially when you're a beginner, if all I can move today is the empty bar, but I do it really well, that's fine. If I can move 50 really well, that's absolutely cool as well. But I just want to move perfectly, or as perfectly as I can. Let's say, like, you want to move better, because there's no such thing as perfect, as we've seen. Like, you just want to move better every session. So rather than being like, oh, I've got to hit 60 kilos on a snatch today, it's like most 90% of people aren't to the point where they can have a weight target for every session and hit it with good technique. Like, there's going to be some discrepancy there. So just come in thinking, okay, I've got 5x3. That's what my coach has set. That's what my program says. It says around 50 kilos. I'm going to just try and hit 5 triples with the best technique I can. Let's see what weight I can hit it with. And if you hit a PB, that's great. If you don't, that's also fine, because you've moved well. That's the main thing I would say. Then as people get on, and this is very much a British thing, people get really obsessed. They almost go to the opposite side of the spectrum when they get better. They get obsessed with their technique and how they're moving, and they don't focus as much on how strong they are. So a typical weightlifting program I would see when people start to get into intermediates phase is they try to go to an advanced, like, elite sports style training program. I'm going to snatch and clean and jerk multiple times a week, like 3-4 times a week. And I'm going to do back squat and pulls 3 or 4 times a week. And I'm going to do them for doubles, triples, or singles. And that's it. And that's all they will do. Most people, you're never going to be advanced enough that you're going to need a program that's that beige, or that is that specialized. You need to keep on getting stronger, and you need to keep on doing all the work that you think that you should avoid. So instead of snatching and clean and jerking 4 or 5 times a week and just doing back squats and pulls, really you should be snatching and clean and jerking from the floor once a week, doing powers another day, doing a variation of it, like hang or pause or something. And then you need to be doing back squat, bench, bodybuilding stuff. You need to be doing jumps. You need to be doing core. You need to be doing conditioning. Like, some people would be a lot better off, I think, when I look at them, doing 2 days less of weightlifting a week. So they only do 2 or 3 days of weightlifting work. Then they do go with your powerlifter mates, do a powerlifting session, then go with your CrossFit friends and do a CrossFit session. Because like your base of your GPP base of actual conditioning and strength isn't there, which is why, like, I use this example, and I know that and it's 2 of my friends from the gym I used to work at, and I think they're going to feel like I'm picking on them because I mention it in every podcast. I won't mention them by name, but they could both snatch like over body weight, and they couldn't do a push up.
Okay.
Not even on their knees. As in, they were like saying, "Oh, I don't know what. I really want to get my jerk and my snatch up, but I just feel like I can't. Like, my shoulders hurt when I go heavy on snatches and jerks." Then I was like, "Oh, what's your bench like?" "Oh, I don't really do any bench. I do dumbbell bench sometimes, and not a lot." So, "Oh, well, how many push-ups can you do?" They're like, "Oh, I can't do 1." So, okay, that's a big glare. That's a big hole in your basic, like, your base level of like human movement. So you need to look for gaps like that and fill them. Like, if you can do let's say you can do like a 1.5 times bodyweight clean and jerk, but you can't do a pistol squat, probably need to fix that. If you can do a double bodyweight back squat, but you can't do a pull up, unless you're a super heavyweight, you need to have a look at that. Do you know what I mean? Like, you need to make sure that you're generally fit and strong, so that that's going to feed back into weightlifting. Like, most of the guys I see who just make like outlandish progress on their Olympic lifts when they're already like an intermediate are guys who are just really strong and really fit, like in general. Like, they can do a lot of stuff like in the gym in general, and then when they put it into Olympic lifting, that power converts over. Whereas the people I see who are really technically nice and they move really well, but they don't make any progress, are the ones that are practicing weightlifting a lot, but they don't do any general strength and conditioning work. So then there's nothing, you don't have anything to feed back into the weightlifting. Like, you've essentially, I don't really know how to describe it. It's like you're trying to buy a house, but you haven't saved up the deposit for the mortgage. Like, you need to go and actually, you need to go and put some work in so you have something to give into it. You need to get stronger in general so that it'll transfer to the Olympic lifts.
Defo. That's good. That's good. And like you mentioned, one thing that might have flown over a few people's heads, which is GPP. So just, can you tell us what that is?
So if you've got like a big pyramid, so as you're sitting in the bottom, that's like your general fitness. And then the top is like whatever sport you pick. So for today, we're talking about weightlifting, so snatches and clean and jerks. The bottom is basically your aerobic conditioning, your basic level of strength, your mobility. So your ability to do very basic things. So if you think of your basic movement patterns, you will cover in any session that you do with any good coach, which would be a squat, some kind of push, whether it's a bench or an overhead press, a pull, whether it's a row or pull up or a lat pull down, a lunge, some kind of rotation. It could be a Russian twist. It could be some kind of integrated movement, like, like a kettlebell lunge with a rotation. And then, have I covered all that? Then like a jump or a throw, like some kind of explosive movement. You need to be able to do all of those to fairly high volumes in sessions without kind of like exceeding your ability to recover. So a really simple one would be, you should be able to, like, this is just like really arbitrary stuff. You should be able to, let's say, do something like run a mile without stopping. You should be able to do about 10 to 20 push-ups, 5 to 10 chin-ups. It's really quite arbitrary. You should be able to, let's say, like hold like a static lunge, like a lunge position for 1 minute on each leg without burning out. You should be able to hold a plank for 1 minute. Like, all these really general things that just show that, okay, you've got good core strength and good endurance in your abs. You've got good, let's say you should be able to hold a squat position for 5 minutes without burning out. You should be able to sit into a squat comfortably for 5 minutes. That shows you've got good mobility. Should be able to do an overhead squat. Like, all these things where it shows that you function generally well as a human, and you have the aerobic capacity to do all these things to fairly high levels each day without being fucked, basically, and still being able to recover. So nice. That's like your GPP. That's what serves as your base, your foundation for your house. Yep. And then the top floor is your weightlifting stuff. Like, the bigger that base gets and the bigger it is, while still being able to focus on your sport, the better you'll perform at the top and the better you'll recover. Otherwise, if you focus too much on your sport and not enough on your base level of conditioning and your base level of like work capacity, you reverse the pyramid and then it's unstable, because your sport specific stuff is so big and it's put on this tiny, tiny base that eventually the whole thing is going to come crashing down through injury or through burnout or just stagnation of progress.
Yeah, awesome. I think you summed that up brilliantly. So just because I thought, you mentioned it at the beginning of kind of when you're talking about a few things, and I thought it'd be good for people to understand the context of it. But I also think one thing you touched on, and you just touched on it again there, which is obviously like the GPP stuff. You're trying to just build that basic level of strength, like fitness, whatever you need for your more sport specific stuff. Was, I think a lot of people probably overthink, or actually probably underestimate what they need to do from like a pushing and pulling perspective when it comes to the cleans and the jerks and all that kind of stuff, and like your snatching. So I think it's a really good point to make, because I think a lot of people just think, oh, well, all I need to do is just basically smash the bar and try to get it over my head and get into those squat and the front squat positions and all that kind of stuff, when really they probably don't think, well, actually, no, it would benefit me to bench, and it would benefit me to probably do some pull-ups and overhead press. So I think that was a good point. Awesome. Cool. So I guess that kind of leads nicely into the next point, because we're talking a lot about, I know we're talking a lot about the ollie lifts, but you did mention squats and stuff like that in the deads. Is how would you go about trying to increase somebody's, main lift, whatever that is, like whether it's a squat, a deadlift, a bench, an overhead press, in like a 2 to 3 month span? So I think like in a month span, I think a lot of people would do, fairly high intensity work, a lot of doubles and singles maybe. And there's so many different ways of doing that. But how would you go about doing it? Let's say if you had 12 weeks to get somebody's lift up quick, what would you really focus on?
So if it's just one lift, then I'd very simply and this is what we've done with a few of the rowing guys. So I'll give away some of like our programming stuff. We just do stuff off of like relative intensity. So I think I've got like an IGTV video on it somewhere, like back on like my page. instead of, let's say, always taking a 1 rep max, you need to remember that like singles are very good at making your ability to do singles better go up. But doing lots of singles, the amount of singles you would have to do in a session, so just sets of 1 rep to build muscle mass and build strength, is actually quite a lot. And as well, you'd have to do them at quite punishing percentages. And the most effective way to get stronger, but also the most effective way to burn yourself out, is to do lots and lots and lots of singles at a heavy weight. So like circa max, so within about 90 to 100% of a 1 rep max. That's also the hardest to recover from, because you're not stimulating muscle mass growth. You're not stimulating your aerobic capacity. You're just stimulating your body to be like, okay, maximal effort every time. The best way I found to get someone stronger, if you have that long as 12 weeks, is to, let's say, pick like, it doesn't have to be any particular weight, just a weight between 75 and 85% of your 1 rep max. The longer you have, the lower the weight you pick. The shorter time period, the higher the weight you'll pick. And just get them on the first day. Okay, do as many reps as you can. And let's say it's 85% of their 1 rep max, and they get out. It's you've got like a female lifter. They're quite strong. They're quite fit, and they do 100 kilos for 8 reps. So that means for the next, let's say, 3 weeks, you are going to do. And this is just like me trying to think about one of the girls that we have. You're going to do 3 weeks of 8. So you're only going to do 8 reps on that lift, and you're going to do 85% of your 8 rep max, which you've just set, for 4 to 5 sets of 8. The week after that, you'll add 5%, and then you'll do 3 sets of 8. After that week, you'll do 2 sets of 8. And then the week after that, or on that same week, you're going to go to 105 or 110% of your 8 rep max, which would be 110, because we set it at 100 for easy math. And you're going to do as many reps as you can. You see what you get. You might get 5 reps, you might get 8 reps again. You now program off of that again, and you keep going around in that cycle. You do a repetition max. It has to be above 3 reps. And then you just keep programming off of that. And it wouldn't be until the last 3 weeks where I would go, okay, now, instead of constantly just going up a little bit in the AMRAP test, we're now going to see where your 3 rep max is. And then for 3 weeks at the very end of the block, I would do a 3 rep max block where, again, you program off of your 3 rep max. Then on that very last week, you test your 1 rep max. And the reason that we do it that way is because, one, you will have seen it. You'll get like some guys, you'll be like, okay, here's 80% of your 1 rep max on back squats. Do as many reps as you can. And you're thinking, okay, they'll get about 6, they get 3. But you'll get like a girl who's got like 100 kilo deadlift max. You'll be like, okay, cool. So we'll take 90% of that, do as many as you can. And you'll be like, okay, they'll get about 2 or 3, they get 10. So people's ability to perform different rep ranges is different. So in terms of, in relation to a 1 rep max, some people will be able to bang out loads and loads of reps of loads of sets of 5 and 90% of their 1 rep max. Some people won't even be able to manage 1 because that's just their capacity they have. But that doesn't change that, let's say, 3 to 5 reps or 3 to 8 reps in that rep range is good for building muscle mass and strength. So the easiest way to make sure someone progresses is to program off, like, what is your actual ability to do a set of 8? Okay, it's 100. Oh, it's 120. Oh, it's 90. And you treat that as the max. And then you program your block of 8s off of that. And just by doing that, I found that you can basically almost guarantee someone's progress because you're always programming off what they can do. And programming off of like a 5 rep max or an 8 rep max or a 3 rep max for those numbers, they're not as stressful to test as a 1 rep max. So I can test someone's 5 rep max, and within the same week, I can be like, right, we'll start your 5 rep cycle from now. So I can test their 5 rep max on Monday, and I can put them straight into doing 5 by 5 at 80 to 85% of that on the Wednesday. And then the same with the 3s or same with the 8s. And I can progress them very quickly in a very, very short time periods because I can just keep on building them up on that. Whereas if I did like a true 1 rep max where they're getting hyped up, they're getting people to spot them, they're getting people to shout at them, they're not going to really be able to repeat that for another 2-3 weeks. Like, in experience, they'll still be able to get close to it, but they're not going to be able to do more every single time. Whereas like if you're testing 5 and 8 rep maxes, if you do it properly, you can push the progress for probably 3 to 4, maybe even 5 months before you need to look at changing things. But the other thing apart from that programming stuff would be, if you're focusing on the lift for 12 weeks, make sure that you're actually focusing and making that lift a priority. So if you want to get your squats up and that's the one lift you want to focus on, don't worry about putting loads of intensity into your bench press or your deadlift training. Just focus on putting intensity into your squat 2 or 3 times a week. And then the deadlift you do 1 time a week. The bench you might do 1 time a week as well. And vice versa. If you want to get your bench up, you might do bench 3 times a week and you'll squat and deadlift 1 time a week and just focus on it that way. Like even at elite levels where there's a lot of lifters who you might think actually progress very quickly across everything in a year, when you look at them, they have little micro blocks of basically focusing on just 1 lift at a time. So like, if anyone watches weightlifting, there's a guy called Meso Hosonia. He's like a Qatari guy. He's got like a really, really big afro. And he literally will have phases of, we're really trying to push my clean and jerk at the moment. So on snatches, I'm just kind of coming in and doing whatever I feel like doing for the day. Really low volume. I'll do like some back squats and front squats, but we're really pushing jerk dips, Clean and jerks, I'm doing really as heavy as I can every time I do them. I'm doing extra jerks after training, and they push it, and they do it that way. So then they'll slowly be able to progress it like that. So try and make sure that when you have a focus, you emphasize that lift, and then everything else you kind of just do almost in maintenance. You just kind of see how it goes and put your intensity and focus into that one lift, especially for people who have full-time jobs, especially if it's stressful. You don't then want to have the stress of trying to make sure every single lift that you do progresses as well. You're just trying to focus on, okay, cool. So I want to get my squat up for this block. So when I come in, I know I've got to put lots of energy into my squat. The other stuff I can just kind of do whatever I want and enjoy it. And then when you then finish that squat block for the next 12 weeks, you work on your deadlift, and then you do the same thing for that. But try and make sure that you keep like the focus as the focus for the 12 weeks, and you don't start trying to add in lots on top of it. So after 4 weeks, you think, oh, my squat's going really well, so now I'll start adding in deadlift work. Oh, my deadlift's going really well, so now I'll start running a mile and seeing how fast I can do that. And, you know, it's piling stuff on top you don't need to. Like, make sure you're keeping whatever your goal is as the main thing.
Cool. I think that's really good advice. And I think it's also a very simple way for people to kind of like progressively overload weekly and make things a little bit more difficult, but also, I guess, regulate it for that individual by just going, okay, how many reps can you do at this weight, program off the basis of that, and then just repeat and then keep cycling it. Good. That's awesome. And I think I was going to ask you, and you mentioned it, is how many times would you recommend somebody to kind of maybe do that main lift? So 2 to 3 times a week minimum. And then would you,
if it's bench press or something where like it's not too stressful because it's upper body, you can do it 2 or 3 times a week, depending on how you recover from it. If it's like deadlifts, once or twice a week, depending on what rep schemes you're doing. If it's squats, I'd say 2 to 3 times a week you could do it, depending on like how you recover from squats. Even if you did 1 back squat session, 1 front squat or something similar, that would be fine. But yeah, 2 to 3 times a week, because then that gives you the opportunity to then on 1 or 2 of the other days, if you're training 3 to 4 times a week, which most people do, to then do the other stuff. Even if it's like you do heavy squats 2 days a week, then you do like your bench or upper body and lower body accessories on the other 2 days. And it gives you the opportunity to do that, which I think is a bit better.
Cool. That's good. That's awesome. And I think just kind of the last bit to touch on is I was just kind of curious how you go about programming or incorporating your kind of plyometric and speed training kind of stuff in your own program, or even just with the guys you work with. So, because, you know, if you're not familiar with kind of seeing Chris's stuff on Insta, he does a lot of, you know, acceleration stuff, a lot of sprinting stuff, a lot of jumping stuff, single leg. You've obviously kind of earned the right to progress in that sense. You didn't start off doing, you know, 100 kilos and, you know, knee jumps and stuff when you started training in the beginning. So you've kind of earned the right to progress that way. So I guess kind of what would you say for somebody who's wanting to throw that into their training? Would you encourage them to do it? Would you maybe say not to? I know we talked about the force velocity curve, and you would probably want to do a little bit of both, potentially, maybe not. So what would you kind of maybe recommend in that sense?
For anybody who's looking to put them in, again, if you're gonna, I'm just turning my video off. I just got to grab something. So when you're looking to integrate that stuff, the main thing I would look at is just making sure that you're doing it at a rate that's like going to obviously be agreeable to your body. So don't go, like we're saying, to like, you know, 100 kilo knee jump straight away. Start putting in jumps and plyos up 2 times a week, and look at just some easy progressions for it. So obviously the easiest thing to do, as everyone will see when you're going to a gym, is just start doing box jumps, like to a low height, just focusing on being explosive, and then start doing depth landings from a low height, and just teach yourself how to land, and then slowly start doing more plyometrics, where let's say you're doing like repeated squat jumps, and then maybe you do weighted box jumps, and then you might start doing some sled sprints, because that would bridge the gap between actually sprinting and needing good technique for it, and then actually just being able to kind of like, you know, let rip on a sled, and then slowly start doing stuff like band resisted jumps, and then single leg jumps, and like progressing it from the simplest, lowest impact form of jumping in plyometrics into the most complex kind, because that's literally what we would do for weightlifting. You go from the simplest version that's the safest down into the version that's more complicated, that would have the more potential for loading. Like jumping is exactly the same. It seems like it's not, because it seems like this mythical thing to a lot of people, because there's no weight, like you can't measure how much weight you're experiencing. It's quite hard to measure, but really lowest impact and simplest drills into the highest impact and more complicated drills. And the easiest way to do that would be like, if sprinting or bounding or like triple jump, for example, is a really advanced form of plyometrics, then you know, like doing a box jump from a seated start with a really, really easy landing height would be the simplest. So if you have that as a spectrum, you slowly work across being able to do your double leg jumps, then you start learning how to do your single leg jumps, and then you start learning how to do your bounding and sprinting. and literally just make sure that you take as much time as you need to progress from one side of that spectrum to the other. So then you're not overloading yourself with variations you can't handle.
Yeah. Awesome. And the last question on that one from me is, at what point would you tell people, too much is too much in terms of doing that plyo work, like within the sessions? Let's say, as an example, somebody might start doing 3 sets of, 3 or 3 sets of 4 with just basic kind of like landing from height.
I would say this, whatever like you can recover from. So something really easy. It's like if you start to feel like the jumps, the quality, you can't jump as high, you can't jump as fast, and you're getting fatigued, that's too much. If you literally have an opportunity to measure your jump height, and in that session you're jumping you're jumping lower, that's too much. If you're starting to feel like you hurt from the jumps, that's too much. You know what I mean? It's actually very easy to tell. But with jumping, just always assume less is more. So like, just do less. Just like always do a little bit less than what you think you need to, because it's very likely that even if you did 3 sets of 3 depth jumps or 3 sets of 3 single leg vertical jumps on each side, that's actually enough to progress. Because remember, you've done none of it, and now you're doing some of it. So progress it that way. And always leave yourself room with jumping to do a little bit more. Like leave the going to failure and really pushing it and going hell for leather for other stuff.
Yeah, 100%.
For like back squats, front squats, and like bodybuilding work. Yeah.
No, I think that's good. Just because I know like a lot of stuff I've been reading and, watching and stuff lately is it's always about training at max intent when it comes to the plyos. And I think what you said is obviously you need to recover from it, but you also haven't done it before. So just by doing, even just 3 or even 2 sets here and there a couple times a week is going to help you progress. And it kind of goes back to, I think, what a lot of people even do in the bodybuilding world, which is they go in full tilt and they start training 6 times a week and they're doing like a ridiculous amount of volume, when they actually probably could do half the volume and get the same amount of results, if not the same progress. And it's kind of the same thing when it comes to the more sport specific stuff, I'm sure, is like, you don't necessarily need to just hammer your body, 2 sessions a day, 6 times a week, when you could probably cut all that in half and still make the same progress. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. So it's training enough to make progress and to an extent no more. Like have fun with it and do what you want to do, but don't do it excessively. Because remember, it's really hard to go from being like an intermediate and then training with advanced volume, like we've just described, to then trying to bring yourself back to intermediate volume again.
Yeah.
Like it actually takes a long time to bring your body sensitivity to training back down. So that's something to bear in mind. Remember, if you're doing 6 days a week of training now for 2 hours and you've only just started, what are you going to do when you need to progress in 2 years' time? Do you know what I mean? So it's always do a little bit less. Like there's a guy called who trained with one of the best weightlifting coaches in the world, who's the late Glenn Penley. He's a guy called Addison Jones, who you can find on Instagram. He, in his first 2 years of weightlifting, and bear in mind he started off, he could back squat like 250, but that's the only measure he had. He can snatch 170 and clean jerk 200. He's cleaned 210 as a 96. And he literally trains 4 days a week because that's all he needs.
That's crazy.
So he's an intermediate as far as his training age goes, but he's advanced as far as his weights go. But because now he only trains 4 days a week, imagine when he needs to progress and he stalls out. He'll be like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I'll just train 5 days.
Yeah.
But if he started training 6 days a week, twice a day, what would happen? Oh, when he then needs to get to 180, 220, he'll have to train, 7 days a week for 4 hours each session. So, it's just give yourself that room to progress and don't get too, don't get too extreme with it straight away. There'll be a time for that eventually.
Yeah, 100%. I was saying this to a few kids in my gym the other day, because one of them's 16, the other one was like 17, and they're in decent shape, good nick. And I was watching them. I was like, you guys are in here 6 times a week and you're here for at least 3 hours a time. I was like, the only thing that we know about volume is, the more volume you do, it makes you really good at doing more volume. It's like, it doesn't necessarily mean you're progressing optimally. And then they said, I was like, do you guys recover well? Are you sore? They're like, yeah, we're fucking sore all the time. I was like, yeah, no shit. I was like, just cut your volume in half just while you can, because you're only 16. Because if not, when you're going to be 30, you're going to be having to do like 5-hour sessions and doing like 25, 30 sets a week just to progress. And they started doing that, to be fair. And they're like, we're still getting the same results. We're still progressing and we're doing half the length of the session. So I think it's a good point that you mentioned that like your body does become sensitive to what you've already put it through, because it's like anything else, it adapts to stress, right? So just make your life easier in the beginning rather than making it difficult. So No, spot on. Well, listen, Chris, I think we covered kind of everything I had in mind today. So really appreciate the time. Just to kind of to wrap things up, pal, is where can people find you? I know you mentioned Ronin Strength a few times, but where can people find you? Insta, Facebook, all that stuff, mate.
Easiest place to find me is on Instagram. It's just at k.speed. The words are KDOT speed. And then if you have any questions about any of the stuff we talked about today, or you want to get coached by Ronin, just message me on there and I'll get straight back to you probably within the day.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, listen, mate, really appreciate it. I'll put all that detail info in the link for the description. And as always, I'm Dan Q. You can find me at Abante Performance. So Facebook, Insta, all that kind of stuff. But listen, mate, really appreciate the time. Hopefully I didn't take too much of it. And we'll definitely get you back on in the future, pal. All the best.